Hi, today I want to talk to you about the subject that cheap is not necessarily cheap. So, in making this video, what inspired me was an experience that I had when I needed to travel from one town to the other, and the total distance was about 1,000 kilometers, and I wanted to travel overnight. So I opted for a cheap uh, bus ticket, and I was so happy to have purchased that ticket and gotten that for that particular price. But as we traveled, I noticed that the bus took a longer route, and it ended up uh, in another province, and then later on came back to my the province that I was traveling to, and the whole trip uh, ended up being much longer than I had anticipated. And because it was a budget service, the seats were uncomfortable, and there were very limited options in terms of ablution facilities, and this particular bus did not make many stops. Actually made very few stops, so you couldn't actually buy food. So basically, I was uncomfortable and hungry. So I realized that I had tried to save money by purchasing this ticket, but in fact, cheap is not necessarily cheap. There is always a hidden cost that you have to pay. Some people make friends very easily, and they don't even consider common values with those particular friends. And when they realize that these people were not actually true friends, they are disappointed. And there are also people I have met who got into relationships, were actually considering getting married, and things just didn't go well, and things just drastically got out of control. And I would ask them sometimes, and I'd ask them, okay, this particular person, where did you meet him or her? And we're like, oh, we just met at a party, we were having fun, everything was fun, was great. And then I just like, I love you. And the next thing we're like, let's just be together. Let's just make this work. And the person ends up doing something, one of them ends up doing something very radical and shocking. And when you interrogate that, you realize that this was just a cheap friendship, a cheap relationship. I know some of you may not agree with that. Some of you might consider that to be quite sensitive or controversial. But sometimes I have realized that the associations, the friendships, or the relationships that we end up entering into, if we do not count the cost and actually examine things, sometimes we end up having to pay in the future. That's why I'm stating the fact that cheap sometimes is not cheap. There is a hidden cost. Another perfect example is when you go to the clothing store and maybe you don't have much money, or if you've got a very tight budget, and you decide to buy a shirt or a dress, and it's a cheap one. And what happens is you wear it the first time, you're so happy, everybody's like, oh, this is so great. And then you just wash it, maybe one or two washes. After one or two washes, you notice that the fabric begins to shrink, or it begins to lose its color. And with time, because it's a cheap material was used to make that particular garment, what then happens is that with time, it begins to form tears, or the fabric begins to tear, and it may not even take up to a year, and you need to actually either stitch it up or end up actually throwing it away because of the serious wear and tear. So cheap is not always cheap, because you then realize that you have to buy another shirt. And at the end of it all, you end up buying two shirts, two cheap shirts, or three cheap shirts, which are now worth a better quality shirt, which would have lasted you for much longer. So cheap is not always cheap. And I want to say to you that if you truly want to build something that will last in your life, do not take the path of least resistance. Don't go for cheap success. Know that there is a price to pay, and you're more likely to build something that is profitable, something that is going to serve you in the future, something that you're going to be proud of when you actually make the effort. Success is not a microwave experience. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes commitment. It may take a year for some, may take 2 years, depending on exactly what you are aiming for. The bigger your goals, the longer it's going to take. If you've got small short-term goals, it won't take you as much time to achieve them. However, the formula is the same. A certain level of commitment is required, and there is no cheap success. Cheap is not necessarily cheap. There is always a hidden cost. Thank you so much for listening to me. This is Dr. Franklin, life strategist on the Success Portal. Goodbye.